Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Good morning.
Can we see
Nice
the
to
rest
see
of the
you.
class? Materialize. Who else is there? Sophia, hi.
Hi.
Elaine, hi. Zizi.
Hi.
Hello.
Audrey. Morning.
Hello,
Georgie, what's so special about Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
I think he was very good at marketing. He was marketing genius, basically. And also he knew how to raise capital for financing his projects. Yeah. And also, of course, he was a good influencer in general. Yeah.
We're going to talk about him later in the course in
Okay.
quite some detail.
It's interesting. He's my one of the favorite businessmen and influencers.
That's why I asked you, because I saw it in your
Yeah.
original notes. So hi, Srijit.
Hello, sir.
Zizi, My Fair Lady.
Right.
Have you ever read, it's originally based on a play by George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah, sure. George Bernard Shaw, yeah. And there's this famous movie with Katharine Hepburn casting there. Yeah.
It came out in 1960. It was a very famous movie at that time. I saw
the musical, yeah.
I saw the play on Broadway when it's one of the only 2 Broadway plays I ever saw, I think.
Really?
It was with Julie Andrews, who did the music. Actually, Audrey Hepburn really wasn't a singer. In the movie.
She didn't sing. She didn't sing.
But Julie Andrews is really a singer.
So Julie Andrews is there. I didn't know that. Andrews.
Original in the play. Fantastic. But movie and play were both fantastic, and the book is really good too.
Yeah.
So I just happened to be reading it after a long time when I saw you had mentioned it. It's a very great story. You finish the sentence. What makes it great? Apart from the good songs, I mean.
It's the great story of the, I would say, organization. Organization by the Professor Higgins and discipline, etc., that he created, this creature, and thanks to this, the best word coming to my mind is the organization now, after all these lectures.
Sounds like you're brainwashed.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like you're brainwashed. I've been talking and think so.
It best describes the whole process going on in the in this play, and he made such a product that even the royal family was sort of deceived, like at first, that she herself was the princess. So it's a good example of by means of hard work, people can achieve great achievements and great goals.
He had broken it down he had analyzed it down into the smallest component parts and acquired the knowledge where he could impart it as a skill. He couldn't make her talk sense, but he could make her talk beautifully.
Right, yeah.
But that's also true, that not everybody who talks beautifully talks sense, doesn't matter how educated they are. So,
right.
I was looking for the homework assignments, and I can't find them now on my computer, too many things up. But we got homework assignments from 6 of you, I think. And our other Anna is here. Michaladi.
Anna will join us in a couple of minutes. She just wrote to me.
Second Anna is here, but I have problem with my video. I can't turn it on. I don't know why, but I'm here, listening carefully.
I second Anna. Is that a new name? You're the other Anna.
We have three Annas.
We're three, right.
Oh, three of you.
Also, and we have Anna Avechka.
Great.
Yeah.
I'd just like to see that, but I don't. Well, we'll come back to it because Bonnie, send it to me again. That's on my screen.
Through the Zoom chat, if you can look through the Zoom chat window, you'll see the doc.
Zoom chat. I'm juggling with two monitors in order to get everything on my screen. Okay. I thought, well, anyway, we're going to discuss this, so we'll come back to it after our session begins. Okay, then let's get started. How many of us are here from Georgia? Apart from Anna, is there anyone else missing? Because I only see 5.
Let me go through the list. Yes, you're right. It's 5 of us.
Rocco is not here. Oh, only 4. All right, plus Anna. Okay, well, as a recap, what have we been talking about? Anybody have any idea what this is all about? This is the 3rd lecture, right? Why we're doing it this way. I'm serious. I'm joking, but I'm serious. There are a lot of ways we could teach theory of organization. Frankly, when I think of a course on the theory of organization, it makes me sleepy. The very idea of talking about organization. But the talk about organization to me is really not a sleepy subject. And I hope that you get that message. And that's why we're doing it in this way. In the first lecture, the main theme was that organization is a tremendous power which is just not fully understood in principle. It's understood in practice. Military knows without organization there's chaos, and we know that without organization of our things we can't find them when we need them. In practice, we can't live without it. But theoretically, there's no subject really organization. The engineers talk about organization. The management talks about organization. Hi, Anna. Was waiting for you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I had problems with connection.
You know the problem. But the truth of the matter is that organization is one of the fundamental human faculties for creating more out of anything. And it is one of the ways, there are many ways we can explain it, it's one of the ways for explaining why humanity has emerged from the forest where the rest of the species remain where they are. Of course, organization is a function of mind. There's no organization without mind, and that is the mind's particular application. Mind has a number of faculties. The capacity to organize knowledge and action and processes is one of them. And we talked in the first lecture about its capacity to improve efficiency, which is what we all know and hear from childhood. its capacity to multiply results, its capacity for self-multiplying itself, which is what living organisms do, and its capacity for creativity, which is usually, organization has a bad name. It's associated with bureaucracy and boredom and rigidity. But the great organizations in the world and the great creative moments in the world are moments in which we tap the creative power of organization. And that's what this course is really about, that power. The second lecture was about where does that power come from? And I purposely started in the abstract, talking about elements of organization that are powerful, so we can understand organization is not a thing. It's composed of many elements that interact with each other in order to generate untold power, creative power, effectiveness power, productive power, or for anything else, or knowledge power, whatever it may be. Now, from lecture 3, we're going to come down to the application. We're going to start looking at the principles of organization in context, which you already know in life. But I wanted to have these elements at the base so we understand we're not just talking about companies here, we're not just talking about markets here, we're talking about life. We're talking about all human existence. And that's very important because when we talk about organization and theory of organization in a company, we're not just talking about the company. We're talking about the company in life. And that's what this third lecture is all about. Putting it in the context, which unfortunately a lot of the time is ignored when we start with the company and we forget that it's just a simple part of a very complex, greater reality. And that's what we're going to do today. So, if I can just clear my screen for a minute. And I hope this is all visible.
We can see the first slide. Yes.
Okay, now, this was the homework assignment. We're going to be talking about Marriott later on. We're going to be talking about the article World as Web later on. And we're going to start talking about Sully in a couple of minutes. And last time, just as a brief reminder, we talked about the objective elements of organization. And now we're going to see them in practice. And those of you who did the homework, we have homework for assignments from 6 of you. Please, Anna, my congratulations. You got Anna Micaldi. Am I pronouncing it?
Yes.
You got the 100% marks on it.
Oh, thank you.
That's really what but there were other excellent ones too. But yours was really the best. And I would like, if nobody's going to mind this, I'm not trying to be competitive, but I would like to circulate the assignment, at least yours, Anna, because, and the second one. Bonnie, can you see the second one? I can't see it now. Who was the second one?
It's by Sophia.
Sophia, that's right. It was Sophia. Sophia's was also excellent. I'd like to at least circulate the 2 of them because they really went into some depth and detail and covered some insights, which we'll talk about in the next few minutes. But I just didn't want to miss recognizing the way you have thought about and applied the ideas in the film. And that's what the whole exercise was about. Please spread the word to the others. The homework is important. The one thing I don't like about this course is having to assign final marks at the end of the year. I wish everybody would qualify for 100. But evaluations of this type are not easy to do. And I need to rely on something to do it. The homework is one, your interactions are another. And my goal is to give you an opportunity to get as much as you can out of the course. I'm not heavy on memorization, but I am at all. but I really am on understanding and being able to apply the concepts. And please know we're available. My team is available. I'm available. If you have doubts or questions on anything, raise them in class or raise them outside the class so that you get, what I'm trying to give you is something I believe will be helpful to you in anything you do in life, in any field of business or non-business, something that will change the way you think about work and accomplishment in life. And if you get that, as far as I'm concerned, you've got something much more important than what's in a textbook. But I want you to work, we're working hard to try to give it to you in the limited time. I want you to work to try to get as much as you can out of it. Okay, enough of that. And then we have the subjective elements. We're going to talk about them also, and in just a minute. And with that, I think, Srijit, you're going to take over?
I'm here.
Okay. Where's Sully? What happened to the image of Sully is gone. So, okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon to you all. I think all of you had seen the movie, certainly, at least 6 of you.
You can put the video on them. Put your video.
Yeah, as we all know, movie is all about the challenges faced by Captain Chesley Sullenberger during and after his flight from New York to Douglas with 155 passengers and crew. His decision of water landing at River Hudson after a flock of Canadian geese hitting the aircraft and damaging both the engines of the flight 1549 and subsequent inquisition from National Transportation Safety Board is the background of the movie. Although his decision saved 155 lives, Sully, the lead character played by Tom Hanks, faces media buzz and a trial. We can see that almost all subjective and objective elements of organization, which we have discussed during the last session, are very well dealt in the movie. Now, all of us can form a Zoom group, just like what we did last time, and discuss among yourself the organizational elements, corresponding perspectives you had observed in the movie. We will discuss in 2 groups and resume back after 10 to 15 minutes to the main session. If all are ready,
Vani, everybody's coming back now? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Vani or Janani, just a quick summary, anything that very striking from the other session you want to share? We're running behind time, but I sorry we can't be in two places at once. So
we had all the students from gyms sharing, typing, some of them who couldn't speak, open their mics and listing the different organizations. And we had Sai who was, he started with a brief summary and talked about, even the ATC, the chain of command, and then the subjective elements of organization, about the leadership, the sense of responsibility that Sully felt. All of those he felt for organizations, the values.
Thank you. I think what was most striking about the reports, and to me about the movie or the story, I read the book too, which is equally good, is that it really talks about organization in its entirety. And you brought it out very well in the discussions and in the homework assignments as to see that the objective and the subjective elements of organization are one whole, and neither of them can be effective without the other. The individual leadership and the structure and clear command, the combination of freedom and discipline, the combination of the need for initiative and creativity, even real creativity, because there was no procedure for landing on the river. That was not in the procedure book at all. That was his initiative. But the procedure, the structure ultimately gave him that authority to make a decision that was contrary to the rules. But without the rules, there's no way that they could have been safe. The rules were followed everywhere, the discipline was everywhere, but the freedom was there at the essential points where it's needed. The teamwork was there. The inspiration, the personal concern, the values, something we're going to talk about a lot later in this, were all there. The value of discipline, the value of commitment, the value of responsibility, of precision, of the captain being the last one off the ship, even when it's filling with water. All of these were real life, wonderful insights into what a real, effective, living, growing, dynamic organization is all about. You've got the spirit of it, and all you have to do is hold on to that. I wanted to mention one other thing, which I think at least two of you, Anna one, and I'm not sure who was the second week. I have it in my notes, but mentioned, and it was a very interesting point for me, and that is, this was really about the human and the machine. This is a story about how they go together. In the work we're doing, apart from this course, we're working with IEEE, which is the largest professional organization of engineers in the world, all over the world, in their field of artificial intelligence and cognitive computing. And we're talking about this, what they call symbiotic systems. We have an expert on it in our organization, where the human and the machine interface. And I think this story brings out wonderfully a point that we have been arguing internationally with IEEE and others, that the machine by itself can never reach the highest level. There is no such thing as a machine intelligence that can supplant or replace the human intelligence. There are things that the machines can do better. They can compute better, they can memorize and remember a lot more than I can, no question about that. But ultimately in life, I'm not talking in a physical system, in a living system, in a living context, the human discretion and the human values are absolutely irreplaceable. And there's no artificial intelligence system that can handle this, this complexity. And the story brings it out wonderfully. From the point of the bird hit to the point of the landing, 220 seconds. And in their calculation, they forgot to figure out that a human being has to decide what to do in that time and to consider all of the options before he finally decides to take this dangerous landing on the ocean. on the river. So I think it really brings out the wholeness of organization in a real context. And every business is like that, and every organization is like that. It combines the objective facts and reality with the subjective, which is what makes us human. Organization is a living thing. The human organizations, social organizations are. And the answer is never something that you can get just from the balance sheet. It's something we're going to talk about, if not today, next week. You can never understand fully an organization by looking at the financial statements. You can never understand an organization fully by following the rules and procedures, even in war. Even in war, where discipline is so critical, the human discretion and initiative and values are so critical. So thank you for a very interesting discussion. And now we go on, and Srijit, or Janani, I guess. Huh?
Yeah. The PPT.
Tell the stories. You want this? You want a PPT? Give me a minute. Okay. We happen to know. I was wondering whether you know Bata, but Pooja, who was accompanying me, young Indian friend, remembered that she saw Bata when we were in Tbilisi last time. So you know something about Bata.
It's very popular in Georgia.
Very popular. And in India, people always thought that Bata is an Indian company founded by an Indian, because one of the biggest industrial companies is Tata. And that's true in Brazil and in many other countries around the world. So the story behind it has universal application. Go ahead, Shana.
I grew up thinking that Bata was an Indian company, because I have seen it commonly in all our towns and cities here. And I'm sure there are many in several countries that think Bata belongs to their country. Actually, Bata has stores in over 70 countries, and it is the world's leading shoemaker by volume today. But it all started 125 years ago in a town in what is today the Czech Republic. Earlier it was Czechoslovakia, and before that Austro-Hungary. So this company, it began in the house of a shoemaker, Thomas Bata. He started with 2 sewing machines and some handmade tools. But Thomas Bata, he had great ambition. He wanted to convert what was then a cottage handicraft into a modern industry. So he worked over 20 years. He built up a medium-sized shoe industry. He had 2,000 workers, and together they were producing 500,000 pairs of shoes annually, some of which was exported to other European countries. But just as his dream was coming true and everything seemed to be going very well, World War II, it changed all of that. Czechoslovakia, most of Europe, and even many other parts of the world were ravaged by the Great War, and the economy was in ruins. And in 1922, in the midst of a severe post-war depression, Czechoslovakia, it saw widespread unemployment, a drastic cut in its exports. There was inflation, people's purchasing power declined, and so there was a fall in demand for everything. And most businesses, they experienced falling income, increasing debt. It was a very, very strange, unpredictable, difficult situation, a little similar to what we are facing today because of the pandemic and the lockdown, when the external forces, they appear to be so powerful, complex, and difficult to handle. Bata's business too was suffering. Just like all the other places, exports had dropped by 75%. Warehouses were full of unsold shoes. Nobody was buying them. So how could they continue producing more? How could the workers be paid? How could they even be, retained? So it was in such a situation that the National Manufacturers Association of Czechoslovakia, it called for a meeting of its members to discuss the government policies and to see what recommendations they could give to avert economic disaster. But all the people who attended, all these industrialists who spoke, they all felt helpless. They felt they were victims of external forces of government action or inaction as they saw it. They condemned the government, they demanded relief, but no one could come up with a solution. It was Bata's turn to speak, and he said something very different that the people hadn't heard in the meeting before. Bata saw, just like all the others, the problems in the country, the government, the industry, the economy, but he also saw this need for some radical new strategy, a new way of thinking. Rather than demanding the government to do something, he called on the business community, all these leaders, to all the people in the meeting to act, courageously. This was a time when layoffs were common. Everybody was, dismissing their workers, their employees. But Thomas Bata, he announced that he was not going to dismiss a single worker. And what was more, he said he was going to reduce the price of his shoes by half. But there was silence in the room. All these industrialists, they were surprised by what they heard. In fact, they thought they hadn't heard him right. And then they all started laughing because what he said sounded crazy. But Thomas Bata knew what he was saying. So he went back to his factory and he explained his decision to his employees. This was the only thing that he could do to save the company, to preserve the jobs. But then to be able to reduce the price in half, all the expenditures had to be cut. So all the waste was eradicated, efficiency, productivity was raised in every department, in every process. Bata announced that he was going to impose a 40% wage cut for all his employees. But then he also promised them something else. He promised all his workers and their families food, clothing, and whatever other necessities they needed at half the present price so that they would not suffer. He had this deep sense of commitment, the same commitment we saw in Sali. He had towards all these thousands of people who depended on him for their livelihood. He promised incentives for higher productivity. He ensured that every employee felt an interest in producing efficiently. So this was almost like turning every worker into an entrepreneur within Bata. And he increased autonomy, decentralized quality control, and he introduced several measures that improved profitability in the company. He also launched a massive campaign, advertising campaign in the country. The result, the public response, it was overwhelming. When he advertised a 50% price cut, the shoe stores that had been empty for months, they were suddenly full. The police had to be called in to restore order, to regulate traffic, and the orders poured in. Workshops became busy. Where there had been uncertainty and despair earlier, now there was excitement, a sense of purpose. And in the coming months, Bata not only maintained full employment, but actually started to expand.
Don't you see the PPT?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Was it visible before?
Yes, it's visible.
Just now.
Yeah.
Only now, I see.
Yes.
You have to tell me, Janani, because as far as I know, it's visible all the time. I haven't changed anything.
Oh, okay.
Now, so you have to tell me if it's not there.
Okay. Now it is visible. So, over the next 5 years, employment of the factories, it more than doubled and production multiplied 15-fold, and the price of the shoes fell, the wages of factory workers, it increased, and just 10 years after all the industry leaders had laughed at Thomas Bata, Bata had the largest tanneries, shoemaking factories, and the shoe machinery industry on earth, and the country, Czechoslovakia as it was then, led the world in footwear exports. And that was why we all feel that, Bata is in our country, it belongs to our country, it became that prevalent and widespread.
Great. Thank you, Janani. It's a really fascinating story. And I hope that you'll see as we go through, there's a lot we can learn about fundamental principles of business and organization by starting from this. And that's what I'd like to do. We're running a little behind on our schedule. What is society? Anyone?
Society is one of the first human networks.
Good.
Sharing interest, common interest and value also, this group of people.
Anything else? It's funny, we live in it our whole lives, but we very rarely we talk about it or try to define it. Let me ask another question. What's the difference between a mob and a society?
Between what?
A mob. You know what mob? Like riot, a group of rioters.
It's
Society has a direction, I think.
it's organized.
Yeah. They are more
it has a
structured.
form of organization, more like they share this. I mean, both of them might share at some point share the same values, but mob influences others without knowing what actually the direction and organization is. And when we're talking about the society, we know that they share something the same and they have kind of a goal or something, but it's the same.
There's some.
I've got a note here. Society is a highly complex, interconnected living network of relationships. A sort of. Can you hear me?
Yes. Repeat it, Zizi.
Society is a highly complex, interconnected, living network of relationships.
Good.
Sort of definition.
Good. So society is, we're going to take it at different levels. What we normally mean by it is a physical grouping of people with shared social institutions, ideas, beliefs, values, and culture. But that's no longer true in the sense that they're not necessarily physical groupings anymore. We have all types of groupings in the world today. It used to be historically that our groupings were very much defined by people who were physically close to one another. And originally, family members, relatives, members of the same tribe, the same village, the same community, the same ethnic group, the same religion, the same linguistic group and everything. Today, our concept of society has expanded and in multiple.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Garry, your voice is gone.
Screen is frozen actually.
Zoom has some kind of problems today.
We messaged him and he will come back soon actually.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. In spite of our high technology and all the backup systems we have, sometimes it breaks the connection. Last word you heard from me.
We were talking about society. I heard lost all this. Yes?
PowerPoint also has to be shared.
So it cut everything. 1 second. we are planning for a very large conference from the June 15th to 19th. You're all invited, by the way, if you have interest. It's an international conference with the United Nations and about 40 sessions and a few hundred speakers. And we're doing it electronically like this. And the one thing we can't account for is with all our technological backup, when something like this will happen, in spite of all the precautions. Okay, so you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
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 So, what is that?
Not now. This is something else. Yeah, it's fine now.
Even though I shared my PowerPoint, it showed you something else, huh?
No, now it's fine.
Okay. Okay.
It's slide of society description. Is it right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Society
Fine.
of any description, wherever it is an organization of human relationships. That's what we mean by society of different types.
You have paused your video, sir. We cannot see you. Is it purposeful?
No, it's just that I'm doing 4 things at once. Thank you. Thanks for telling me. It's a complex network of networks. It's called in the article, which I hope you have read, it's a web. It's a web of relationships. And it's a very good metaphor for a complex living organization. There are some differences between society and most of the things we call organization, but fundamentally, there are valid comparisons in every respect. The main difference is that when we talk about a business organization, we mean something that's very highly organized for a particular purpose. But society is an organization that relates to all human purposes. And just as the company tends not to be involved in the rest of our life outside of business, our family life, home life, personal hobbies and problems and preferences, society organizes only a small part of what human life is about. And for the rest of it, we're left on our own. The family organizes part, the community organizes something, but personally, each of us is not constrained by the limitations of that organization. And in that sense, that's true in a company as well. We're going to draw the parallels. And one way to describe it is, it's the macrocosm in which all human activities take place and from which they draw all their resources. And it's this last line that I really wanted to come to. That's the point of the rest of our discussion today. Society is an infinite sink of resources. And what are the types of resources that society has? I'm calling them social resources as an overarching name, but it's an infinite sink of energies, knowledge, skills, technological and organizational know-how, cultural potential, and maybe we have forgotten a few things here, but I'm trying to be as exhaustive as possible. And this is something that companies usually lose sight of. Virtually everything we have and everything that a company has for its productive growth comes from the society. That's a big ideas. When a company invents a new technology and we say they have come up with something new, what we really mean is they've come up with a half or a quarter of a tenth of a percent of innovation on the top of innovations and technological achievements that have been accumulating over 1,000 years, from the invention of the wheel and language and everything else. everything a company does is incrementally building on the cumulative knowledge of and capacities of the society. Not only technological capacities, organizational capacities, which are as important or more important than that, on the basis of the law, on the basis of the education that we receive before we come into the company, and the knowledge that's been accumulated over a long period of time. And this is a fundamental point that I'm focusing on this morning, because when we look at the potentials for the growth of a company, to a very large extent, those potentials are not what's inside the company. Those potentials are what's outside the company that a company wakes up and recognizes that it hasn't realized before. We call it the market, but when we think of the market, we're really talking about just one small component of what the outside is, what's outside that. And this is what I want to go through this morning, and then we're going to talk about it, how this comes into the company and how it's represented in a company. And next lecture, fourth lecture, we're going to look at how do companies augment these resources? How do they tap this untapped potential, which is the source of their growth? And to make an absolute statement in the beginning, there is no company that exhausts the potentials that it has. There's no company that exhausts the organizational capacities that it has. There's no company that exhausts the social potential that it has. And that's why we've started from the outside and are coming in. And I hope to give you enough examples to convince you that there's some truth in that as we go on. So right now, we're going to talk about 5 of those social resources. The reason being, these are the 5 resources that summarize. It's only a way of summarizing. We could divide it into 50 categories instead. But what are the essential elements for the growth of a business? So I want to first look at it in the society, and then we're going to come back after the break and look at it in the business. And the first of them is what we know, what we all think of, and that is the market. And I mentioned already earlier, the market itself is a complex, uncentralized organization. It's uncentralized in the sense that nobody is strictly in charge of the market, at least in a market economy. Individual buyers and sellers are making their own decisions. The market is an organization to enable us to find each other. In the case of Bata, when the exports are down by 25%, when the economy is down, when unemployment is high, when it looks like the main problem for Czechoslovakia is that the market has disappeared, Bata looks at it differently. There are a lot of people who can't afford my expensive shoes, but they still need shoes. Is there a way I can attune myself to tap their need? The essence of the market is human needs. The market, what we call the market, is based on conscious and unconscious, existing and emerging needs and aspirations. And this is true of every company that we are going to talk about, at any company you can find. The market that we measure when we say, I have 80% of the market share or you have 90% of a market share, we're only talking about the market that has been identified, organized, measured, and serviced. We're not talking about the market potential. We're never talking about what the potential is. We're only talking about what we figured out already, how to serve, and what we're getting a response to. And growth always involves a growth in our capacity to attune ourselves to those social needs and aspirations. Why unconscious and conscious? Why do I say conscious and unconscious? Because not only the companies are not always conscious of the needs of the society, but society is not conscious of them either. And we're going to get some great examples of that. FedEx was an example. We talked about it in the second lecture last week. When Fred Smith decided that there was a market, if he could get goods overnight 2,500 miles away in the United States, nobody realized that people were willing to pay twice the price for that. It seemed like a lot of money to get a small package overnight all over. He recognized that the value of speed, reliable speed, was so great that the people didn't recognize it. The customers weren't asking for it. The other competitors weren't delivering it. He understood something that was unconscious in the society. Later on, when he understood that measuring the capacity to tell a customer exactly where their parcel is, even if it's not delivered, and when it will be delivered, that information was an unconscious need of the customers. I asked him, how did you know that it was something so important that they invested $500 million in leading edge technology so that they could give the customer information about their parcel when nobody was doing it at that time? Is that what the customers told you? They said, our customers never told us that. We just understood how valuable, we perceived something that was unconscious in the society and made it grow. So we're talking about something that's unlimited. I like the term an infinite sink, an infinite reservoir of potential. And there's a great truth in it. Every example we talk about is a validation of the truth. Bata had defined his market as the home Czechoslovakian demand for shoes in a particular price range. And within 5 years, he was selling shoes all over the world. He'd never even thought of that. He had been selling in Germany, but he was going to India and Africa in search of leather for the shoes, and then found out that they also need them, and it became global. So geographically, markets expand, but they expand in many other ways as well, and we're going to explore it. Markets, a social institution developed to fulfill these needs. And so we've got the developed market, which does it very well, which we rely on for our food and housing and clothing and other necessities. And we've got the undeveloped, unorganized part of the market, which has not yet been organized, which has not yet been fully tapped and systematically and efficiently and effectively met. In most countries, that's true for the health care of the elderly, or the attention to the elderly after retirement. There are needs out there, but in America, not where I'm living, but where I'm from, the support for the elderly, which used to come from the extended family, from everybody living together, is gone. And there's an untapped market out there which is not fully organized. We organize through retirement villages and homes for the elderly and everything, but it meets a small part of the need. So society is like that. Markets, a system through which social capacities are exchanged to meet these needs. I think it's an undiscovered potential and creative innovations. So we're going to come back to it. I hope it's obvious, but also that the fact that we never fully exhausted is also obvious. So this is the first of the 5 that we're going to be looking at with respect to the company. The second one naturally comes to mind, capital or finance, depending on what you want to talk about it. But I'm not just talking about the money. I'm talking about the whole field of capital and finance. And I've just listed here some of its many, many dimensions. We can divide it in different ways, because the capital on which businesses and society thrives is, first of all, natural resources, land, water, sea, air. And it's amazing how far economists have forgotten about the fact that our whole existence depends on Earth, and that we've been mining and taking out the resources of the Earth for so long without ever really measuring what's the cost. The cost is only measured by how much it costs us to dig it out, not what it costs us to replace it. The fossil fuels, which have been created over millions of years by the decay of organic material, and we're consuming them in less than a century. Without ever, how do we value those resources? What they really value to humanity? They weren't created by the companies who happen to now have mining rights on the land. But this is the foundation for modern society. And of course, the air we breathe, which we still don't value. But if you want to increase the GDP of the world really fast, one of the ways we could do it is suddenly sell air and put it at its real value. If we simply put a price on air, then suddenly we'd be spending a lot more money, and everything would be a lot more costly. Our GDP would go up, but not necessarily our quality of life, because we're spending a resource without really valuing at its true value. So there are natural resources. There are the physical assets, many of them. The one I want to mention, there's a wonderful book written about the history of France from 1880 to 1920, when France went from being a very backward rural nation. I'm not talking about Paris, I'm talking about the country as a whole, to becoming a modern nation. And one of the chapters written was a wonderful chapter on roads, roads, and more roads. And the author explained, named Weber, Eugene Weber, he explained how the roads created the connectivity. It was a system, a physical organization. It created the connectivity which took all the rural areas of the country and linked them together, not only with the cities, but with the world around them. And we don't realize, we don't measure, we don't understand usually how valuable these connectivities are. And roads are only a physical version. Now, of course, we have much more. And then, of course, it also includes the different forms of credit and investment, different forms of financial instruments. The trade in Europe really boomed only during the Renaissance, when the Italian bankers started introducing what they called bills of exchange. We call them today something like letters of credit is one version of them, where people could transact over long distances without carrying cash with them by transfers of credit. These are all resources. And of course, since then, the types of financial vehicles we have multiplied infinitely, and they're still multiplying every day. And we're still trying to get our hands around what it means to have a blockchain currency like Bitcoin, and the currencies are multiplying. Every major central bank in the world is trying to wonder how they respond to blockchain, and many of them are serious, like China, it's well known, are introducing blockchain type currencies which work not through banks, but can be directly distributed by the central government. So this is a field of infinite innovation, creativity, and potential. And of course, many different types of money. Money itself, a very interesting subject in itself, but money itself is a social resource. It has no inherent value in life. If you're alone on a desert island, money can't help you. It has no value except if it's paper. You can burn the paper in a fire or sleep on it on the mattress or something like that. Money is a resource has value only because we live in a society with other people. And we accept the same symbols, the same organization for the exchange of value. Those of you who've had economics courses know the perfect definition, economic definition of money as a unit of account, a measure of value, a means of exchange. But that really is only a narrow portion of what money is in society. It's a networking tool, just like languages. It's a means for us to communicate and exchange value. It's a symbol, more than even its material value. It's a symbol for power. So if you have money, people understand, oh, he has money. You can get almost anything with money. You can get political influence with money. You can get popularity with money. Not love, maybe, but you can get popularity. You can get lots of things with money because it's a symbol of the capacity to accomplish. You can travel with money, you can communicate with money, you can get information with money, you can do so many things. So money is itself a creative social organization. And the interesting point about it, and this is the subject for a course, not 5 minutes, but I just wanted to show you how it ties in to the subject we're talking about. The interesting thing is that just like the story of Sully, the real success of Sully, of the movie and the actual fact was, depended on subjective factors that are immeasurable. His judgment, his sense of responsibility, his decision-making, his knowledge. The same is true of money. The real foundation of money is nothing physical. It's trust. And when we lose faith in that trust, money disappears. Those of you who can remember the 2008 financial crisis would know that in a matter of a few weeks, $8 trillion of value disappeared from the financial markets without any material change, simply because trust had fallen. We see it in the world today. We see that trust in our political institutions has declined so much that the world suddenly seems to be in a half chaos, where a year ago it looked like things were on at least a semi-solid footing. Because the subjective reality is, I would say, more important in organization, more important in society, more important in prosperity and development than the objective. And remind me of that when we come back to Steve Jobs and the story of Apple. All of them, the story of Bata illustrates that. While everybody was sinking, he made a subjective decision, had a subjective perception, had an aspiration, had a vision, had the leadership, all of these intangibles which we can't even define, let alone measure. And he built this small company into the biggest in the world. It's a very important lesson for us. Ultimately, the success of any organization depends on us, on the human beings who are part of it. And when we remember that, our potential is infinite. When we forget it, we start managing everything by the balance sheet, and that has its own consequences, which we'll talk about. Okay, and then speaking of us, society is an infinite sink of human potential. And we're going to come back and talk about this later on, but this is a small assortment. I could have filled 5 screens with it. Physical skills, social capacities, psychological endowments, mental abilities, of all descriptions. We can list hundreds of them here. The human resource is not, there was a time not that long ago, 150 years ago, where human beings were measured in terms of horsepower. How many horses do you need to replace a group of people to doing a work? Because it used to be done by people, and then we could get horses, and then we got tractors and cars, and we still measure the power of our cars by horsepower and all, because it was physical. We cannot measure the capacity of human beings by horsepower. That's only physical strength and labor. Our capacities are well illustrated by Bata on one side, Thomas Bata, the original, by Sullenberger on the other, and by everybody who accomplishes at a higher level. So again, society is an infinite sink of human resources that are constantly growing and developing, and you're a good example of that, right? Your human resource, your people in the process of growing and accomplishing more. And if there's any solace for you, I can tell you that at the age of 73, I still feel there's so much to learn on all of these categories. It's an unending, you can never In fact, the older I get, the more I realize how much there is to learn. And I don't mean from the textbooks and everything. I mean from life and about all of these things: judgment, capacity, commitment, imagination, values, which we're going to talk about, courage, the development of personality. I think we're at a very early stage in the capacity to systematically develop our own personality or that of other people. Having studied psychology, I've come to the conclusion that psychology is a science in its infancy. We're better at studying rats and mice in a maze than we are of understanding people. There's so much about the human endowment that we don't understand. We're going to come back to it in one of the last lectures because it's so important for organization. The capacity not only to tap the potentials and develop the potentials of the people within an organization, but the potentials of those in the world around us, because that's what companies do. They help bring out the potentials, the higher potentials of people around them. So, huge topic. And now technology. And, you know, technology is the buzzword today for human accomplishment and all. And we've already said earlier, from the example of Archimedes with his lever and his fulcrum, that technology is a form of organization. It's a form of organization capable of infinite, incremental development and improvement. So I called it the know-how that enables a society to multiply the productivity, efficiency, speed, quality, and ease of use of all human activities. It's a broad definition, and we could have added a lot of other things: the enjoyment, the capacity for communication, the capacity for all. It's a much longer definition, but just to make it broadly. And society is where we get all of this. There's nothing we use, from the spoon or knife and fork at dinner, or the oven or the light, or anything we use up to the technology we're using for this class. There's nothing we use that doesn't come from the society and that isn't being improved daily, either by companies or being improved by individuals now, or in the public domain, or by governments or something else. It's in a constant development, inexhaustible development. And I just mentioned a few of the areas where the technology we get comes from the society. Age-old knowledge about mining and metallurgy, extraction, processing, manufacturing, transport, communication, and so forth, and so on. So when we go into a company and they say our market is saturated, we've run out of money, our people are demotivated, and therefore we're thinking that within 3 months we'll have to close. I've been into dying industries. I'll give you an example in one of the next lectures. An industry which the whole industry was disappearing. And we said, well, if you want to close, you can, but if you really want to tap your opportunities, you don't have to. And that was a company that was planning to close in 1990 and is still in business today. So this is the point of my emphasizing out here, that nobody, no company can tap all of the potentials that are there in any one of these areas, let alone all of them. And then finally, the point of all of this, the source of this, the hero of our story here, organization. And I think you've already got the idea. I've given a definition: the structures, systems, processes, procedures, activities, standards. You used all these words very nicely today in the discussion on Sully. Rules and other types of arrangement by which people and institutions and activities are linked together to meet human needs and objectives. These are the known organizations that we think about at the level from starting with the family. That's where we started, evolving up into communities, eventually only after agriculture came into towns and cities and government and law and social systems like telecom, now internet, social networks. They're all social institutions of all description, marriage, businesses, and so forth. It's an inexhaustible list. We can never exhaust the potentials of this resource. But we're often blinded to taking it for granted and working within the four walls of our existing concepts and not realize how much greater potential there is. So this is what I wanted to say about society. Society is not just an organization, it's a living organism. And just like we are constantly drawing things from around us, society is vibrant, it's changing, it's multiplying, it's growing, it's learning all the time. And it's also dying all the time because we're giving up things that don't work, or sometimes even things that do work. We're changing all the time. We're destroying things all the time. Sometimes we're not sure whether we're going forward or backward, though the general direction in some areas seems to be clear, and in others it's not. But it's a living thing. And these are not five separate things, the market, technology, organization, capital, and people. They're five aspects of the society, and we could have divided it in 100 different ways as well. And that's why in what we do from this point on in our discussion for the rest of this course, this is our context. Our context is not what's within the four walls of the business, not what's their current product line or technology or people or market share or financial statement or how much money's in the bank. This is the context for any business. This is the potential for any business. And we're going to talk about how do we tap more and more of that potential as we go on. And I'm talking about a business because you're in an MBA course. We could be talking about a business for, it's true for government, it's true for civil society. And the conference that will circulate some information that we're having at the UN in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, 10 days, is about the global society. And how does global society, where we don't have any leader in charge, we don't have a lot of impressive leaders even, we don't have any organization that's in charge or has the authority over everything, but we have the same challenges at the global level as we do at the business level. How do we tap more of the social potential of humanity, of this globe, and do it in a better way than before? And I hope that you will agree with me, there's got to be a better way for us to do it than the way we're doing it now. There's got to be a better way to organize ourselves collectively for humanity. We have the potential, we have the financial resources to create enough prosperity for everybody. We have the technological and organizational resources to create abundance for everybody. But that's not the way we work today. And that's true in companies as well. That's true in economies and companies as well. We are a species that's evolving. We're learning as we go. I hope we're learning. We're learning some things anyway. We have a lot more to learn. We're a young species maybe about how to manage our human relations in a way that will have optimal benefits for everybody. It's a big topic. Anyway, if you're interested in the bigger topic, you can come and join us for a conference. So what do I mean by a living organization? All living organisms grow, they coordinate, they organize, they integrate, they adapt, they evolve, and they create. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about society, and that's what we're going to talk about when we're talking about organizations in business. So, before we come now, finally, on the third lecture, halfway through, we come to the subject of the company, really, for the first time straight on. So before we do that, we're a little behind planned schedule. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume for the second half. Okay. And if you have any questions, I'll take questions at the beginning of the break, after the break, before we go into the next section.
Okay, thank you.
think you can stop your screen sharing now.
Why should I?
We get to see your Skype, I think. So.
You see the Skype. You're not supposed to see the Skype. You're not supposed to be able. How come? 1 second. 1 second.
No, no.
No, wait. I shared the wrong thing, that's why. Because I don't understand why Srijit said he couldn't see it. I had it shared, I thought. Okay.
Now it is. You can see the PPT.
If any of the team has something to say, call me on WhatsApp. If there's anything you want to discuss.
All right, sir. You're speaking in the main Zoom, actually.
I'll close it. I mean, I'm muting it. You call me on WhatsApp.
Okay, fine. You are to unmute your audio, Garrison. Audio.
I know, I was waiting for everybody to come. So.
Yeah.
Gary, can I ask you a question regarding the midterm exam? Because in the schedule we have midterm exam next lecture, and is it right?
I thought it was the lecture after that, Sophia.
That's great.
After next lecture, yeah?
After next lecture? Okay, that's great because...
but I had the same question about midterm. What are we going to do? Project or something else?
How about we'll talk about it next week? But
okay, fine.
We're working on it. It's on the 20th, I believe. But I would want you to apply the principles that we're discussing now. One of the homework assignments was to read The World as Web, that short article, which talks about the society as a complex network, like that. I want to see that I've been giving light on the reading assignments. More, I want you to be thinking about it. But I would like you, when you come into the midterm, to be able to take the principles that we've been discussing and to apply them in a context. And the questions will be mainly for applying them to see that how far these principles are clear to you, and because that's what I want you to come away with from the course, something that when you go into a different context than what we're talking about now, you'll know how to apply it. But we will discuss it more next time and leave some time to answer any questions that you have on it. But, I'm not thinking of a project. We did a project last time when we did it in Tbilisi, and I found that I liked the idea that everybody was applying it in their own context, in that case, in the companies they were working in. But we found some people are having responsibility for a whole company, and some people are, it wasn't easy to judge and give people a full chance in the limitations of their own organization, because not everybody was about the same level of experience. Ultimately, that's what I'd like you to be able to do. Go back and take this and apply it in your own organization. And we will provide some time in the course to discuss that.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Good question, and please don't hesitate to ask questions like that whenever you have them.
Okay.
Okay. So what is a company? Anybody? Simple.
It's a kind of establishment for some kind of purposes and goals.
I can't see who's talking. Should you put on your videos?
It's Anna who did the second or third.
She can't. She's not able to put on her video.
I have problem with my video today. I'm with my phone. I don't know why. Maybe because of poor connection.
It's fine. When you do talk, just identify yourself, because I don't have
okay
my screen at this time.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Me again?
Yeah.
I said that this is establishment reaching for some purposes and goals.
Okay.
This is a unity of people and systems which have one goal.
Yeah, this is an entity that which is kind of compound with a group of people who share the same goal, at least should share the same goal. That is also something that we study in organizational behavior and other subjects as well, that yeah, every member should share the same goal in order to be a part of the company and an organization. Yes.
I liked when you said, should share the same goal, because it's more in theory than in practice in a great deal of the time. Very true. Good. Okay. What I wanted to focus on is, there are many valid definitions. This is the one I wanted to focus on. A specific type of social organization designed to enable groups of individuals to perform economic functions of production, trade, transport, distribution, and myriad types of services in an effective way to meet social needs. We can go on. And I'm not going to ask you to write this definition. I only want you to think of it in terms of the subject of the course, that's all. Okay. It's an indispensable, inseparable, indistinguishable part of the society. And my emphasis is on all three. A company does not exist separate from the society. You can't even draw the boundaries of where it starts and where it ends. And the most obvious example of that would be a company like Google. But there are so many today. It's true of all. The companies extend outward and the society extends inward. And this is the point I wanted to really come to. A company is a child of the society, born of its needs and growing by meeting those needs. And it's kind of like people, because the same is true for us as individuals. And yet, it's a common sense of human nature that somehow we are different from the society, we're separate from the society, we have to thrive against the threats in the society, we're competing with the rest of the world. That's the ego, psychology of the ego, that we're all separate and independent. And yet we don't exist for a moment psychologically separate from the society in which we live. And the same thing's true of companies. But there are a lot of companies who really feel they are an airtight compartment and they're trying to survive in a hostile environment, when that's a very small part of the reality in any case, because everything they have comes from the society around them. It's a child of the society, born of the society.
The connection is lost, yes, again.
Yes, it's a technical problem.
Yeah, I'm contacting him actually.
Zoom is out of order.
Yeah. He's back.
Okay, you see me again?
Yes.
Video is still there?
Yeah.
Audio and video are there. The PPT has to be shared.
So that's what gets disconnected. Okay?
Yes.
Okay.
You were in the third point, child of the society.
Okay. Every company is a child of the society. It only exists in relationship to the society, and it can only survive and grow in some positive relationship with the society. I had originally planned to give you as homework a chapter in the Vital Difference, the earlier book, called Harmony Without, which tells the story of how companies grow and prosper by increasing their harmonious relationship with the society around them. And you can think about any of the great companies today and see how their reach keeps extending by meeting more of our needs in a more effective way that helps the society to grow. This is the formula. The society's growing, the society's evolving in multiple dimensions and directions, in qualities. And those companies that are able to identify with that and help it grow and become part of that growth so that they're really inseparable from it. And we don't know how we could live without them. It's because it's not primarily a business, it's primarily a social institution that's there to serve the society. Okay. A company integrates with society. It's indispensable, inseparable, indistinguishable. We've already said it. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the company. Srijit, you'll tell me when to change the slides, huh?
Yeah, it's actually you can hear at that time, sir. Now can be here in the slides. So I think we had given this as an assignment for you to read last session. I hope most of you have read it. But still, I would like to tell the whole story of Marriott Corporation, how they established themselves. It was a summer in 1927. Bill and Alice, a rustic couple from rural Utah, USA, had moved to their capital city for better prospects. Walking around in the sweltering August heat, they took in the sights and sounds of Capitol Hill, White House, the Monument, and in the humid heat, they got very thirsty, but couldn't find any place for a refreshing cool drink, except a few bars. After some time wandering around, they found a man selling lemonade from a push cart, and it was finishing as fast as he could make it. Then they thought to themselves, why don't we start a business like this in a proper place? This was in the year 1927. The old Alice and Bill, they put together all their life savings and started their first outlet. Can you go to the next slide, sir?
Coming.
A root beer stand. A 9-stool root beer stand. This was in the year of 1927. And there they did almost everything by themselves, two of them, from purchasing, helping with the cooking, cleaning, serving customers, collecting payments, marketing the business, and all the while looking out for new location to expand. The next year they started their second outlet, serving Mexican fast food, called a hot shop. Can you go to the next slide, sir? In 1928. Now, since they had two outlets to take care of, the husband and wife team started to divide their time between the two places. And they did well and made a success both. By the end of the year, they had expanded to 4 outlets, including the first drive-in restaurant on the east coast of USA. That is again in 1928. Can you move to the next slide, sir? These are real pictures which we are showing actually. By next year, they had 6 outlets. They kept growing, and then the Great Depression, which started in 1929, hit them hard. As the depression was there, many suggested Bill and Alice not to expand further. These 6 outlets are sufficient for you in this age, and further expansion will backfire you, because you might not be able to manage more, was the common advice, especially from their lawyers. If we look at the initial days of 1920s and 1930s, those were the times in which, American society was undergoing drastic changes, especially in their lifestyle. Whole of the society were started tasting prosperity in 1920s. American society had seen mass production leading to huge automobile manufacturing and investment in the sector. And US was changing totally as an automotive society. 1920s were called the Roaring Twenties, showcasing its booming all around. This restaurant, what we are discussing about, started as a driving restaurant. Americans started driving their cars, parking it near roadside restaurants, and ordering and eating the snacks and food in their parked cars. It is common nowadays, we all know that. But it started in 1928 actually. Irrespective of the advices given from many, Bill and Alice continued their business, and in 1937, hot shops found one of their biggest opportunity which any restaurant can dream of. In 1937, can you move to the next slide, sir? In 1937, a crew member from an Eastern air transport flight stopped at hot shop. No, previous slide. Stopped at hot shop number 8 for a cup of coffee to take on the flight to New York. Soon passengers started to come by before their flights to purchase sandwiches and drinks. Hot Shop started supplying box lunches to the airline, then and slowly started serving all the 22 domestic flights from Washington Airport. It was the birth of the first flight catering services. They later on diversified, you can move the slide, sir. They later on diversified into motels. The first motel was established in 1957. It was the largest in the world with 365 rooms. In 1967, they expanded to resort hotels, then to cruise lines and amusement parks, 2 theme parks. Later on consolidated themselves into luxury hotel chain, and in 2016, they became the largest luxury hotel chain all around the globe. And you all know that we told it in the beginning also, the company we are talking about is the Marriott International, which is the biggest conventional hospitality chain. I made the qualifier of conventional intentionally because now we have Airbnb, which technically may be bigger. But that is very different business model, leveraging crowdsourcing technology, which became possible only very recently. OYO is our best example in that category. Actually, in Asia, that is the best example. Can you move to the next slide, sir? If you are seeing 2019 and 2020, they have 7,000 plus properties, offering more than 1.3 million rooms. They have their own brands, 30 brands, established in 131 countries. They create a job of 176,000 now, as of now. I got curious to see their growth rate spread over the last 92 years. And so I did some maths, and it showed that they grew at a phenomenal rate of 76 outlets a year for the last 92 years, which works out to 6.33 outlets. The smaller ones, they started as hot shops and all, counting that. 6.33 outlets being started every month. That roughly equal to 1.5 outlets opened every week for the last 92 years. That's an incredible growth rate of one outlet being opened somewhere on the planet Earth every 112 hours for close to a century. So I would like to take a pause here. You might have read that particular assignment last session. 3 questions I would like to post, and then we can go for a Zoom grouping again and we'll try to discuss about those points. First is, what was the secret of such a phenomenal success? How did such simple folks, Bill and Alice from an unsophisticated background with no management credentials, achieve such exponential growth? What was their secret formula? Vani, if you could start a Zoom group, we'll be discussing this further.
Okay.
Thank you, Shri. Do I have to share this again, or can you see it?
You'll have to share again.
Okay. Because it shows on my screen that it's already there when I try to share. That's the confusion. Okay.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Just one more comment on Marriott. What I want you to get out of this, the comments were very good about the role of the system. And since it's described, the SOPs, standard operating procedures, since it's described so well in the book, I didn't want to, we don't need to dwell on it. It's so critically important. It's so much their secret. But there's a counterpart to that, which we didn't really discuss too much. It's what happened to Bill Marriott or Willard Marriott himself. Because Marriott started in the first root beer stand with Annie when he and his wife were doing all the work. And then he went to two when one of them was in one and one was in the other. And by the time he had 5 or 6, he could not do any of the things he was doing before. He had to spend all of his time going back and forth between them and having managers for each of his branches who could make sure that things were working. So he created these SOPs as a way to institutionalize his own capacities, his own standards. They really represented an externalization of his capacities, his values, his insistence on perfection, on cleanliness, on good service and everything. And that's what an organization really is. It's an external manifestation of the values and attitudes and capacities of the people within the organization. It's not something artificial. It can be, it becomes that. It becomes something dead and bureaucratic very easily. But when it grows and it's vibrant, it's got the life that the individuals give to it, not just the founder, but it can be done in successive stages by people at each level of the organization and by leaders at each level of its further growth and development. So one of the stories we'll come back to, but I really hope you get it and think about it, is what happened to Bill Marriott? Willard, he was also called Bill, but the younger one became then the Bill. But what happened to Willard Marriott, who originally was cooking and serving customers, who then was managing, think of it, managing 3 to 6 locations for a couple of $1 million. That was a lot of money at that time, just at the time of the Great Depression. And then before he knows it, he's got 20. And he has to spend all of his time dealing with banks, dealing with lawyers, dealing with purchasing on the bulk, organizing general managers for each of his functions. Where did he get those capacities? He could be literally doing nothing he was doing earlier.
Can I say?
Yes.
He delegated his responsibilities to the managers. So with this way, the managers were controlling and doing part of the things that he was busy with before. So they were visiting all these hotels and do this very thorough checks like he used to do.
Thank you, Anna. And to do that, and we'll come back to it, but to do that, it's a little easier to say it than to do it. As most people who've tried to delegate know, there were 3 essential conditions for that. 1, he had to be able to develop the people to be able to do what he was doing and to motivate them. He needed to give them the knowledge and the skill. 2, he needed a flawless system that would enable them to do it without all the experience or the capacity that he had. And that's where the SOPs come in. But the point I really wanted to emphasize is the 3rd one. He needed to be willing to give up doing. And that's often the hardest. He needed to be able to give up doing what he was so successful at in order to learn new things that he knew nothing about. He needed to keep growing. And I've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs and owners at different levels. And one of the hardest things for people to do is to keep growing and keep learning and give up what they've been doing and trust that other people could do it as well or better. And there are great stories of how Marriott did it. And that's the secret. And so when we come back to the story of the individual and the role of the leader in an organization, and the role of leaders at all levels of an organization, these 3 things come back. The system, without the system, effective delegation is very difficult. With the perfect system, if you don't develop the people, not only give them the knowledge and the skills, but the values and the motivation, it doesn't work. And still, you have to be able to get out of the way. And one of the companies I'll talk about later became the largest motorcycle manufacturing company in India, one of the largest in the world. And when I went into his company, he was a Harvard MBA, the darling of the stock market. He had 28 general managers who were reporting to him on everything. And his main complaint was that they bring everything to him. And I said, why wouldn't they bring everything to you? The moment they present it to you and they get your opinion of it, they're no longer responsible because you're taking the decisions. And he couldn't resist that temptation to get involved and second guess everybody and tell them what to do. And I came back 6 months later, and he had shifted his office 500 miles away from the main headquarters. And I said, what are you doing here? You're so far away from your corporate headquarters. He said, well, you told me to delegate. And I said, that's not delegation, it's abdication. He didn't know how to make this transition that Marriott made, and it's amazing. He had a Harvard MBA, and Marriott was just an ordinary graduate from the Midwest, from a simple background, but he had that intuitive sense of how to grow and how to grow an organization. And that's what this course is about, how organically to grow ourselves so that we grow an organization that exterior represents us and manifests and supports not only us, but everybody in the organization to keep growing, as they did at Marriott. Great. Okay. Let me come back here. So this is a favorite subject of mine. I'm just going to touch on it here because we're in the transition now between the society and the company. And Srijit already emphasized the fact the Roaring Twenties, when Marriott took off, was a period of extraordinary change and opportunity in America with a big business that was thriving, growth of prosperity after the 1920s, and the booming business of the automobile. We already talked of Henry Ford. By this time, Henry Ford was producing 1 million vehicles a year, when the whole of the United States, 20 years earlier, was only producing about 10,000. So this was the period. This was the period in which mobility was expanding. But Marriott kept growing right through the Great Depression, when business was down everywhere. He kept growing when the airlines came. And then in the 50s, when the post-war, Second World War boom came, the building boom, the business boom, the transport boom, when air traffic became, he moved into the hotels and business travel became more and more. So he was always in tune with the waves of social progress. And that's what I mean by catching the wave. The businesses that have really continued to grow over time continue to be in tune with the ever-evolving changes in the society because they all change. Kodak camera, which was so famous, it was a household name all over the world for cameras and photo film. Now we don't even hear the word because they didn't make that transition to the digital camera. In fact, they had digital camera and they didn't. If we sell digital camera, who's going to buy our film? They completely missed it, and so most of the companies do. So
as I know, sorry for interruption. As I know, Kodak invented this digital technology.
They did actually. You're saying they did actually invent it, and that's interesting because you know Xerox. Maybe you know this also, Georgie. That Xerox invented the graphic user interface with the mouse and the desktop metaphor, and had no use for it themselves. Steve Jobs picked it up at the Xerox Research Institute in Palo Alto. This is often the case. Xerox was another example that they couldn't give away the technology to somebody else. A new company had to come along. I don't know, any of you who have ever been surfers? Any surfers in the group?
No.
Surfers?
Not really.
Well,
No, we don't have
I would
enough.
like to, but I would love to, but
well, I'm from California, and then I lived in Hawaii for a time, and you can't escape surfing, though at least as a culture and know something about it. And there are things I know about surfing. There are three things about surfing.
they need to catch the wave, right?
Exactly. And what happens if you don't catch the wave?
You can surf.
Bad things could happen.
Things like in the right-hand corner of my picture. I don't know what corner it's in.
They may broke down.
If you don't catch the wave comes and piles right on top of you. Or it leaves you completely, and I've tried it, it leaves you completely just standing still. You see the wave coming, but if you're a little late, the wave goes on and you're left in the still water because you lose the energy. If you're a little too early, the wave comes and pours and dumps right down on your head and does what it did to this guy. If you're just right, you just position yourself on the top of the wave, and it's magnificent to see. You can see it on YouTube, I'm sure, some wonderful videos where the wave just carries you in, shooting like a shooting star from out distance to the shore, and you're just almost flying on the top of the way this guy seems to be at the moment. And that's the key at timing. It's the society's energy, it's the society's momentum that you have to catch the wave. When Apple Computers started with PCs, there were a number of other companies that started. Apple was one of the earliest ones, but by the time what they called the IBM PC came in about '82 with Microsoft's MS-DOS operating system, there were about 200 companies created in Silicon Valley alone in a year or two to catch the wave of the PC revolution. And yet within 5 years, 90% of them were out of business. And there are only a handful that we can still remember by name today, Apple being one and Hewlett-Packard another. Dell wasn't even in business at that time, and he came later in the show and became the #1 in the world for some time, and the Japanese weren't in it yet. So the timing is really critical, but it's not the only thing. You can be the first in, and you may end up being the first out. But being the first in comes because you're in touch with the society. Jobs in Apple, we're going to talk about, was the first in understanding the urge of people for a computer that speaks English and works the way we do, rather than making us learn all of these convoluted technical commands that were required of the engineers at that time. And he essentially changed the industry. He grew the industry. He set the standards for the whole world on what computing should be and how we interface with machines, because he was really on the leading edge of it. And yet, it took him 10 years or more before he could convert that into a business success. The original Macintosh and Lisa were not commercially successful, even though they were, I had one of the Macs at that time, even though they were remarkable machines, they were not commercially ready yet. But he came back with it, persisted with it, and finally set the standard for the world.
As I know, it was very expensive at the time to afford.
I can tell you, when I bought a Mac, which was in '87, it was about twice as expensive as the IBM compatible PC. It did things that the others didn't. It was a little slow. It didn't have enough storage space because the graphic user interface took up a lot of space and everything. And then he went on with the next computers, we'll talk about it later, and tried to prove that he was right, and he failed, lost $50 million. And 10 years later, he converted all of that work. He was right, but it took the time for the wave to catch up with him. He was ahead of the wave. 10 years later, he sold Next Computers for $500 million, went back to Apple, and founded the most successful, the most valuable company in the history of the world up until that time. My story here is not, we'll come back to that. My story is the society is constantly changing, and being in tune with that change, not just the market, the technology, the people, the values, the attitudes, the organization that the society offers, being in tune with the whole society creates the energy and the resources for nonstop growth. Okay, so a brief interlude here. What's the purpose of a company?
To make the profit.
Great idea. Who said that?
Zizi.
Great. You know, you may get a Nobel Prize one day because Milton Friedman became very famous by saying the purpose of a business is to make profit. Fortunately for the world, unfortunately for Milton Friedman, he's not so famous anymore because it's a ridiculous idea. But since he had it first, you're in good company, and he's very famous. It's a ridiculous idea that the purpose of a company is to make profit.
That's the most widespread perception of the company, right?
Absolutely, universally agree.
To make a profit.
Exactly, and that's why I asked the question, and that's why I'm going to ask you to read a paper, which is a little bit theoretical. I'm not going to test you on the law of it, but I would like you to read it. We'll give you the assignment at the end of the class. It's an article that I wrote for a business book on the theory of the firm, the theory of a company, and it's only now, and Milton Friedman espoused this about 30 years ago, it's only now that the business world and the business leaders, including World Economic Forum, have come out and proclaimed that the purpose of a business is not just to make profit. It's not just to serve the shareholders. It's to meet the needs of all the stakeholders in the company, and all the stakeholders means the society at large. And yet for 30 years, not just Friedman, not just the Chicago School of Economics, which is one of the most famous in the world, but unfortunately, under the brilliant leadership of American enterprise, we've been selling this nonsense philosophy to the whole world until it had absurd consequences. So it's fundamental to the world. Now World Economic Forum comes out in manifesto. You can find it last January. I think I may have, no, I wrote the chapter a month before it came out, but now it's come out. Hundreds of business leaders in the US last year came out with a declaration that the purpose is not just to make profit, because it's essential. And even the customers have begun to realize this, the shareholders have begun to realize this, and now companies that say our only purpose is to make profit, they find it much more difficult to get investors, they find it much more difficult to get employees. And they're even finding it more difficult to get customers. This is a revolution that's taking place. If I had said this a year ago, I would have been on the in front of the wave, and it probably would have come down and knocked me over. But right now, this is where the wave of social change is. So please read the article, think about it. Let's discuss it next time. Okay, now, and this is the sum, the punchline. Companies exist in order to serve the needs of the society and all its stakeholders. And that's why I've started from the totality of the society, because those needs are unlimited and they're constantly changing and evolving. Okay, let's go on. This looks familiar. I want to check how we're doing on timing here. We're a little.
We have another 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes.
Okay, we're a little behind. Okay. We're going to come back to this tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but next, don't panic. Next Saturday. But we've already discussed what these 5 sources of resources are. And now the statement I'm making is these 5 resources are also the engines for the growth of any business. Every business possesses these five because without having them, you can't be in business. There have to be some needs in the society which you're serving. That's what I mean by market. There have to be some know-how, some expertise that you have, whether it's for ironing clothes or selling at a corner grocery store or selling pharmaceuticals, some know-how that enables you to do that or deliver packages around the world. You need people. Without them, no, there's no organization. You need some type of resources, some physical resources, some financial resources, some kind of capital as your base, even if it's mainly intellectual capital. And you need this nebulous thing that holds it all together to take the know-how we have, the people we have, the resources we have, and deliver products and services to meet the needs of the market, which is organization. And the key point we're going to come back to is that the overall performance of a company depends not on how good you are in one of these or two of these, but how good you are in all of them and how successful you are in maintaining a balance between them. And it used to be a fad in the 80s to say we're a technology-driven company. In some cases, companies pride themselves, we're a finance-driven company because the CEO is a finance person. And some companies where the salesman has been, marketing people have been at the helm, we say we're a market-driven company. But the most successful companies don't make the mistake. They may tell the public anything, but they know without these five, we're nothing. We're not driving. We're just being dragged along. All five are important, and the blend between them is important. And that's why I started with the society, because we know now where the capacities come from. And now we're going to look, especially next week, at how we harness those societies. What I wanted to do, just to close the loop, because we won't have enough time to do it all, is to go through what do we mean by each of these five at the level of the company. We talked about it at the level of social resources. I think it'll be fairly obvious, but I want you to be thinking, and I'm going to ask you later in the course to think about every organization we talk about in terms of these five. And what is it? In terms of, we're going to talk about Marriott that way. And others. Okay, so the market, the company equivalent of the market resource is what I call the market engine or the market component. How do companies convert social needs into business opportunities? That's the question for the company. And there are lots of ways they do it. And if we had the time, I'd have an hour discussion and let you tell me what those ways are. And we'll discuss it next week. But first, they have to be aware of the needs. Second, they have to be able to respond to the changing those needs because they're changing all the time. They have to be able to reach out to new customers. They have to have the right strategy for marketing. These are obvious things when you think about it. I'm sure you've already studied most of this, maybe all of it, in other courses in MBA or earlier. They have to have the right positioning for their products. They have to have the right sales strategy, not just marketing strategy. Customer service is very important. And forging strategic partnerships and alliances. And probably if we had the time, you could add another 10 or 20 that are missed here. But I think you get the idea. There is a market potential out there, and there are things companies do to tap it. And I have not met a company so far of any size, including a Marriott or a Merck, or that does all the things, all of these things as well as it can do them. And that's an important premise. You don't have to take my word for it. You can challenge me on it, but that's an important premise as we go through and look at how they succeed. Okay, that's market. Then people. The question here is, how do companies engage, develop, and harness the productive and creative power of their people? We talked about it with Sully. You've talked about it very well with Marriott. And all of you in our group emphasized the fact that Marriott's capacity to win over the people, to win their allegiance, to work, to respect them, to listen to them, to work as member of teams. And this is an infinite potential. We can never, because if I say it's infinite, because your potential for growth and development is not limited. None of our potential is limited. So the potential of the people we have in our organization is not limited. And our capacity to grow by growing our people cannot be limited. It's not easy, but we can never say we've exhausted it. And getting the right people in the right place, with the right systems, with the right standard operating procedures, with the right incentives, with the right recognition, with the right respect and everything. No company that's worth its value would say that we do it all well and we've mastered this. This is the ultimate in human leadership, and we have a long way to go in mastering it. So respect. Compensation is there, of course, but that's just at the baseline. Money alone doesn't explain things. Training, development, attention, empowerment, personal growth, and values, which we'll come back to. So these are all what I mean by people as an engine, or rather things that companies do to mobilize and convert that into an engine for growth of their business. And then finance. How do companies mobilize, utilize, and multiply the capital assets and financial resources of the society? Since we're talking about, we already talked about Marriott, since we're talking about Marriott, Srijit told us they have 7,000 properties all over the world. It would be interesting to know how many of them they own. Because one of the innovative things Marriott started doing about 30 years ago, the time I wrote the book, was they started letting other people build properties and investing in the properties. And their job was to run the properties and run them effectively, because they realized their expertise is not in owning the thing. Their expertise is in managing and marketing it as part of a global network. And many, I don't know the percentages in Marriott today, but many of the corporate properties that they manage or are run as Marriott's today are not owned by them physically. It's not their investment. They invest in the people, they invest in the systems, they invest in the marketing, but the money comes from people who have money and nothing else. They don't know the rest, and they put up the money for it. Okay. And then technology. How do companies develop and utilize the knowledge and know-how of society to produce and deliver products and services to meet the market needs? And I've mentioned some types of that knowledge, that know-how, that technology, because it's there in every aspect of a business. It's not just the people who are doing design engineering or even manufacturing. Technology today. One of you, I forget, who was it? One of you was working in the logistics industry. Tamar. Tamar is not here today. She used to work in a logistics company. Well, logistics is all about technology today. All of these sectors are. When we talk about technology, we're talking about how everything is done. We're not just talking about the machines and the computers. We're talking about the know-how to do it better. The guarantee, the SOP is an organizational, yes, but it's tailored, it's targeted, it's linked to every other aspect of the business as the know-how they have for running a company. In fact, technology and organization are inseparable. Because if you remove the organizational element for virtually any technology, you have something that's not very usable. The best example is Sully's airplane. It's not the airplane that lands successfully, takes off and lands. It's the organization that provides all the information, all the safeguards, all the procedures, all the training to use this machine in a way that works and works flawlessly with such a, and one of you in your comments in the homework, I like the comment very much, commented that this is one of the most rigorously disciplined industries in the world. And yet even there, where everything is regulated, everything, the protocols are down to when you put out the landing gear and the flaps up and everything is totally, and yet even here, the human contribution is so critical that even today we've had landing, you know, automatic pilot for takeoff and landing, they've had that for decades, but still the landings and the takeoff is done by human beings. They don't trust the machines at these critical junctures unless it's an absolute, unless the pilot dies in his seat and there's nobody else to land the plane. So that marriage between the people and the technology is critical. And finally, again, how do companies utilize the power of organization to meet the needs of society in terms of function, activities, freedom and authority, structure and systems, communication, coordination, and in every dimension. So I wanted to close the gap here to say, which I said in the beginning, all this comes from the society, all of it has an internal representation in the company. And what we're going to do next week is look at the ways in which companies work on these 5 areas and energize themselves for growth and high performance by improving on each and every one of these. Every one of these is a potential. Okay, so before we're going to wind up in about 10 minutes, any questions about all of this, or it's so obvious that we can go on and assume it's all clear?
It was too obvious.
Too obvious. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's good. I'm glad that you find it obvious. That means.
And very interesting. We know some issues we're talking about, but it's also very interesting.
Well, next week we're going to see what we can do with it. We're going to take it out for a ride and see what we can do with this. Right now, we have an exercise for you. This is a homework for next week, right? We chose Amazon because it's at least one company that I think everybody knows and everybody is probably related to in some way or another. And we can't say the same about every other. So we want to ask you some questions. And this is a homework assignment. How do companies convert social needs into social opportunity, business opportunities with respect to Amazon? We've taken the 5 questions about the 5 engines and are asking you to think about the answers to these questions with regard to Amazon. And you're going to have the PowerPoint, so no problem. But how do companies engage, develop, and harness the productive and creative powers of people? How do the companies mobilize, utilize, and multiply the capital assets and financial resources? How do companies develop and utilize the knowledge and know-how of society to produce and deliver the products and services to meet market needs? How do companies utilize the power of organization to meet? Srijit, I think you're unmuted right now. And right now, if I checked a few weeks ago, but I'm not sure, you can't be sure in this market, but I believe that Amazon is still the most valuable company in the world right now. So it's a good place to start. I think it's one we all know enough about. I want you to think about it. You'll get the PPT for the PowerPoint, or the PDF for the PowerPoint, so you can go through and look at the different components. The slide that has these obvious things on it. You may not know all of it. I don't expect you to, but whatever you can identify from your experience, let's pin it out, and we want it as a homework assignment. So the homework assignment is threefold. I want you to read this article on the theory of the firm. It's not that long. I think maybe it's 7 pages or something. The chapter in Vital Corporation, chapter 2, entitled The 5 Engines of Growth. Not too difficult. You've got the concept now. I'd like you to read it. And then this assignment, maximum 1,200 words. We won't count them if you're a little over, but that to give you an idea of what length we're looking for. If you want to do a little more, okay. On how Amazon mobilizes these 5 resources for its growth. Any questions?
To add on to that, the Amazon, the story, how they developed and how they are using new terms and terminologies associated with Amazon. For example, how Amazon Marketplace works. All those informations are available in Google and in YouTube. You can search there. If you want, you can contact us back. We can send you a PowerPoint. Around 50, 60 PowerPoints are there, which you can get more information about Amazon actually. Thank you.
And the format in which we're doing our assignment is also PowerPoint?
No,
or it could be Word?
Word.
No, Word.
Okay.
In Word, just in Word, right?
Not PowerPoint. Not PowerPoint. Okay. Just in words. How you see the 5, the different elements, as many of it as you can. We don't expect you to be all experts on Amazon, but how many you can identify just from what you already know, and how much you know of its history, and how it's grown by this. We just want to put all this knowledge in a context. And since we couldn't describe it, we couldn't present it all to you here, we want you to think about it, come back to us, having applied the knowledge as much as you can for a company that you know a lot about. Okay. Any questions on anything that we have discussed in the first 3 weeks? No. Any questions about what we're going to do in the next weeks?
No.
No. Great.
Next week's
everything is clear.
Next week's the rest of the course, or just next week?
Well, beyond the course, I'm not qualified to speak, but up till the end of the course, I was willing to speak. But Zizi, what you're going to be doing in the next 20 or 50 weeks is beyond my...
No. I checked about your question. The rest of the sessions, our sessions, or just the next week?
I meant if you have any questions, that's all.
Okay. We'll come back to questions next week.
We were interested about the midterm exam.
Yes, and I did say we would come back to that next week, Anna.
Yeah,
Next week.
Yeah, you already mentioned that.
But I think if you follow the cues of what I've been emphasizing, you'll know what it's going to be about. I'm going to be asking you to apply the concepts and the knowledge in known contexts to see how far it's real to you, and how far you can really identify the keys to utilizing this knowledge. That's what I want. I want you to come away with something of practical utility, not only for understanding, but for action. I think
how we can apply the gained knowledge and information
for your own benefit.
Right.
I mean, that's what you're here for, right?
Right.
And I think it'll be clearer. I'm waiting because I think it'll be clearer after next week's lecture, where we're taking the sum of the first 3 lectures and really trying to apply it. And this exercise with Amazon will be a step in that direction. So if you really understand this exercise, you'll be well along and comfortable with the knowledge with what it means. And we're going to start from here talking about companies and how they do these things. But I thought of starting with one, instead of me telling you a story, you can tell us, what you already know. The more that you think about it, the more it'll stay with you, the more real it will be. And the more you'll be able to apply it in life. Okay?
Okay.
Anything else?
I want to mention about these 3 weeks. You completely changed our vision about organization, and the answer about on what is organization will be completely different at the end of the course than it was as the first one.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you, because that's what we hope.
Thank you.
This is after long experience, because when somebody started talking to me about organization about 40 years ago, 45 years ago, I said, this is not a subject I'm interested in. And now I find that every subject I'm working on or interested in, organization becomes a critical element of it. And so I hope that you will find that, I'm very happy to hear that. I hope you will find it as you go forward in whatever you do, that this knowledge stays with you and is of real practical value. Great.
Sure. Thank you.
Somehow,
Thanks a lot, Garry.
by some miracle, we ended up out on time for it also. Have a great week. Look forward
You
to
too.
You too, and talk to you next week.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.